Right, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you can all hear me. And welcome to this panel debate on rethinking packaging and waste management. My name is Frederic. I'm the Energy and Environment Editor of Euractiv, and I will have the pleasure of moderating today's discussion. Now, before we start, a quick word of introduction, if I may. Packaging and waste management have attracted a lot of attention over the past years in Europe, with new legislation adopted less than 2 years ago to eliminate single-use plastics, including some of those used in packaging. Now we're heading towards even higher ambition with a new circular economy package that was presented earlier this year, which contains proposals for even higher targets, notably when it comes to reducing packaging waste. So how should Europe now move forward on this? And what is the role of producers in reducing the amount of waste that we throw away each year? To debate this topic today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Mattia Pellegrini, Head of Unit at the European Commission's DG Environment, Archana Jagannathan from PepsiCo Europe, Jean Hornain from Citeo, the French recycling company, Emmanuel Katrakis from the European Recycling Industries Confederation, and Venetia Spencer from the Polyolefin Circular Economy Platform. Welcome to all of you. We have just 1 hour ahead of us for this debate, so let me remind you that this is an open discussion, which is open to the online audience as well. So don't hesitate to put your questions in writing using the Q&A function in Zoom, and I will take a selection of those towards the end of this debate. Now, after this introduction, let me start the discussion straight away with a very simple question to all of you, which I would kindly ask you to answer in less than 1 minute. When it comes to waste management and packaging, what are the main challenges that you see lying ahead for the coming decade? Mattia Pellegrini, the floor is yours for 1 minute. And Mattia, you should unmute yourself.
Sorry, I just did it. So good afternoon, everybody. And I will be very short. So I think I see 3 challenges. One is really to move from waste management to waste prevention. And this is, as you may be aware, is one of the key elements of the revised Circular Economy Action Plan. So it's no longer how we manage waste, but also how do we prevent waste. And actually, with the new revision of the packaging directive, which is foreseen for next year, this will be one of the key components. Then the second one is how to design packaging in a way that is totally reusable or recyclable, and to have essential requirements which in the legislation, which they allow for that. This may also imply that a certain type of packaging may be forbidden due to the fact that they're neither reusable or recyclable. And finally, I think what will also be extremely important is to make sure that to correct situations where the market is likely not to function. So for example, plastics. As you know, you mentioned single-use plastics. In the single-use plastics, we have a mandatory target for recycled plastic content for beverage bottles of 30%. So one of the issues we're going to look in the packaging revision will be the issue of mandatory recycled content. So these are 3 key issues. I mean, there will be possibility maybe later to elaborate more, but that's, I would say, and this, of course, I mean, the Commission is fully aware of the importance of packaging. So of course, we want to make it reusable and recyclable, but we do attach a lot of importance to packaging and packaging companies.
Thank you, Mattia, and I'm sure there will be plenty of questions afterwards related to what you just said. Let me turn now to Archana Jagannathan, the main challenges as you see them.
Great, thank you, Frederic. I mean, firstly, a decade is a really long time in this fast-changing waste management world. So I do hope before a decade we have collection, sorting, recycling in place. I fully agree with Mattia. I think as producers, as PepsiCo, we are committed to designing packaging that is recyclable and also incorporating recycled content in our packaging. But 3 key challenges that we see and we need to face into as an industry. The first is I think we need much better collection systems, so very good collection systems across the board with high rates of collection for all types of packaging material. Secondly, as an industry, we need to be encouraging investment and innovation in sorting and recycling technologies. We announced this morning a collaboration with 86 other companies on Holy Grail, which is an advanced sorting technology. We need a lot more investment and innovation in this space to drive sorting and recycling. And the third, again, fully agree with Mattia. I think creating the right competitive marketplace for recycled materials, creating the right demand and pull for these materials is going to be critical if we want to drive the development of this industry going forward.
Great. Thank you very much, Jagannathan. Let me turn now to Jean Hornain from Citeo. Jean, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Frederic. So for me, there are four main challenges we have to address. The first one is the strategic challenge for the company, for the producers. You know, Citeo is the extended producer responsibility company in France. So within the producers, eco-design has to become a strategic element and not a side product. You know, everything should be thought in general with eco-design for reduction and recyclability, especially on plastic packaging. The second challenge for me is technological and innovation. For the material itself, we have the new solutions, for instance, solutions for substitution. And we know that we have new recycling technologies coming up. We need to accelerate those points if we want to reach circular economy. The third, for me, challenge is economical. We need to create demand for recycled material, and therefore to fight for minimum content requirements in all industries so that there is a demand for recycled material, especially on plastics, in a context of prices for all which are very, very low, and we know with virgin material very, very cheap. And the fourth challenge is the social. We mentioned collection. We need both on the municipalities, for the municipalities and the citizens, try to push education, information on the benefits of circular economy and recycling, because they are key to the success.
Thank you, Jean Hornain. Let me turn now to Emmanuel Katrakis from EuRIC.
Yes, I think actually I was going to emphasize what has been just said. I mean, we are still in the midst or in the aftermath of the crisis stemming from the COVID. We saw plummeting prices, oil prices that have been plummeting, that had a huge impact on virgin polymer prices. And the reality is that today it's hard to compete for a number of end markets when it comes to plastics with virgin plastics. While we know, having done a lot of LCA, that plastics recycling saves a lot of CO2 and energy. And one of the only, if I may say, end market that has been doing pretty well during the crisis was the one for, in terms of price and demand, for recycled PET for food grade application, showing basically that the recycled content targets that were set in the single-use plastics directive already had an effect on the market. And also we saw that already major brands are committing to far more than 25 or 30%. So indeed, actually stimulating the demand via those targets or via incentives and also via EPR schemes are absolutely essential. And the second point I want to emphasize is obviously eco-design, because without proper design, we very much lose a lot of value in terms of the materials when it comes to the recovery phase. And that's why it's really important to connect the dots and have a well-functioning value chain from design up to the end of life phase of packaging products we place on the market.
Great, thank you, Emmanuel. And so to close the round of initial statements, let me turn now to Venetia Spencer.
Thank you, Frederic. I'm guessing I can't say one of the challenges is coming last after such excellent highlighting of some of the challenges that are really facing packaging and waste management. And maybe just 2 seconds to explain why I'm here talking about polyolefins. So just for those of you that might not know, when it comes to plastic packaging, 70% of that market in Europe is a polyolefin. And for that, PCEP is here to actually bring together all the actors in that system to talk about how we transform these materials from linear to circular. And I mentioned that because I think one of the biggest challenges with all the circular economy, packaging and in every other area as well, is that what we're talking about is systems change. And systems change is really hard, and it requires everybody to really come together collaboratively, because if you just look at any one point in the system and what you might change there, it has knock-on effects either side. So we really have to look at what we do from the impact it has on the system as a whole. I think, obviously I would endorse the points that have been made by my colleagues on the panel. Fundamentally, certainly for polyolefins, what we really need to do is generate a system that is collecting materials in the cleanest possible streams at the largest possible scales, because that's what's going to really shift the economics for keeping the material in the economy. And there's lots of factors to that, design, collection, investment, infrastructure, but it's about having enough polyolefin of one kind in one place for that recycling technology to thrive. And I think the third challenge, if we're looking out to a decade, is how do we get that system right in such a way that it also works for and encourages the reusable system that Mattia alluded to, which of course is the next stage for circularity for packaging. How do we get today's system working in a circle and keeping the material in the economy, but also how do we look to tomorrow's economy and tomorrow's systems and make sure that what we build today and invest in today works for where we're headed on that longer term journey.
Okay, thank you to all the panelists for these quick introductions and for setting the scene in this way. Now, let me maybe invite you to reflect a little bit on what's been done so far when it comes to waste management and packaging. What do you believe has worked? Maybe there are good things that you'd like to highlight, and I'm probably thinking more about collection systems, etc., or recycling systems that have been put in place at the European level. So what has worked in your view, and maybe what hasn't worked that well, and then what needs to be addressed? Mattia, Pellegrini, maybe you can start.
Yes, so let me start by making a fair assessment of what is the situation so far. As you know, there is already packaging legislation and based on a set of essential requirements. And we know that these essential requirements, which indeed, as some of the speakers have said, is essential, they were referring to eco-design. The essential requirements are these conditions which needs to be met by packaging before it is placed into the market. So we know that, let's say, the conditions as such have been too broad, and therefore we have in the market packaging which is neither reusable or recyclable. And in certain type of packaging, this may be a significant proportion. So that's, I would say, we have a piece of legislation which has helped us to make packaging more sustainable, but clearly we are not yet there where, indeed, in line with the Green Deal and also with the Circular Economy Action Plan, the idea is that all packaging which is placed into the market should be either reusable or recyclable. So the idea is that zero type of packaging goes to landfill or to incineration. So that's, and we are not yet there. So that's, I think, is the, also, I think what has worked well is the system which needs to be reinforced, but indeed the system of EPR, of extended producer responsibility, by putting the burden on the producer and increasing the price of the product as function as a way to internalize the cost of pollution. Of course, you may argue that this will increase finally the price on the final consumer, but indeed also the final consumer has to be aware that when he buys something, there is also an external cost which is attached, an external environmental cost which is attached to his purchasing decision. So that's, I think, is the, and also I think one important element is that in addition to what, let's say, a non-sustainable packaging for certain areas, as I said, has worked in certain areas, but not necessarily on others. What we have seen is also, and this is even mentioned both in the Green Deal and the Circular Economy Action Plan, a new phenomenon, which is the one of overpackaging. So what has been happening in terms of overpackaging is that sometimes the companies have used standard boxes, and of course you have an enormous amount of space which is lost and environmental cost attached to it, because you could have transported that specific good with a packaging which could have been designed in a different way. So more sort of smart design of the packaging which is missing, and sometimes leads to this over packaging. So that's and of course, I mean, as a final point, we know that there is a need in terms of what can be improved to act on the demand. I think it was mentioned by both PepsiCo, but also by EuRIC and Citeo. Indeed, there are two ways to act on the demand, and we will try to deploy both of them in the new packaging revision. One is the mandatory content on recycled content, so a mandatory recycled content, notably for plastics, where the market is not functioning. And then the second one is to use public procurement. So it will be one of the first pieces of legislation where we will introduce as you know, there are green public procurement, but at the moment, in most of the Commission only recommends to member states the use of green public procurement. The idea would be that for certain activities that are done by member states, we will then introduce an obligation to use green public procurement. Notably, if we look at package, there is the whole area of catering, where many, public administration, they use lots of catering services. So we may introduce a mandatory green public procurement for all the activities which are related to catering services. In that way, we will make sure that whatever it is used when they ask for catering of certain services in terms of packaging, it is sustainable. So this is another way to reinforce this need of acting on the demand.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mattia, for these detailed explanation. Maybe now a view from PepsiCo and Archana, Jagannathan. Do you share the same views, or what is your impression? From where you stand, looking back at what's been done so far, what has worked and what didn't?
I definitely share Mattia's view that a lot of work has happened at the EU level at the Commission with the circular economy package. And we've now set a very clear ambition for circularity, which us as producers, but also for the whole industry, drives a specific ambition and a lot of clarity. And that has driven higher recycling rates in the EU compared to the rest of the world. But obviously, we know that's not enough. I think going forward, what's going to be key is really thinking about how we enforce these and land these in member states in a consistent way, right? So what is the more prescriptive guidance from the EU to make sure that this lands in the member states, and how do we set this up at a high standard across the board? The second thing is really the innovation and technology. We've been working with Citeo in France, and Jean can comment on that a little bit, but we've been working on driving recycling of flexible films, working very closely with the Citeo team. We'd love to be at the table with every PRO organization across Europe, having similar discussions, supporting and catalyzing change in the same way in member states. So I think, landing this, making this work in the member states now, translating that guidance from the EU is going to be really, really important over the next decade.
Jean Hornain, Jagannathan just mentioned you, so maybe you can say a few words about what you think has worked and what didn't.
Yes, I hope you can hear me, because it says that my connection is not that good. So it's okay, you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay, good. What actually worked, I have to say, is the creation of EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, back in 1992, actually in France and in Germany, making the producers and the feeders responsible for the end of the life of their packaging. This was a real good innovation, and 10 billion euros have been invested to create separate collection, to create sorting centers, to actually create recycling, and also citizen awareness. And today, like in France, you know, we recycle 70% of household packaging. And this has been I have to say, that's a success of the past 25 years. Now, what has not worked is, in my opinion, is that this topic, circular economy, the planet, was not at the top of the agenda of everyone. The companies, it was not at the top of their agenda. The municipalities were not that involved in this issue, and the citizens. And what we've seen now for the past 2-3 years is a considerable raise in the awareness of the fact that the planet is not free, and that we have to do it, and we have to do it fast. I guess for me, the second thing that has not worked, and maybe Venetia could say a word, I think that on the plastic side, the plastic industry has not committed sufficiently heavily into recycling. We produce in Europe 60 million tons of plastic each year. I guess less than 10% is from recycling. And, you know, we've succeeded in glass, in cardboard, in metal, and we have to, you know, we need the commitment of the plastic producers to make a strong move because they have the technology, you know, for chemical recycling, and we need them to create that demand for recycling. And maybe one last point for me, that what did not work in the past years is we maybe missed something with the citizens and the consumers, because at least here in France, we see so much littering and so much stuff, you know, in the streets, in the forest, and everywhere. And as we all know, the issue of plastic is not the carbon, you know, footprint. The issue of plastic is its impact on biodiversity. And so, you know, we have something which has not been going well. And I'm talking about France. But if I'm going outside Europe, as we can see on the pictures of television, we have missed something in countries where there are no collection systems, and you know, with tons of plastics going to the seas and the oceans every year. So that's what we have to correct very quickly.
Thank you, Jean Hornain. Let me turn now to Emmanuel Katrakis for your views on what worked and what hasn't worked.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
I think, again, I'm going to sum up what was said before, but over the last 30 to 40 years, with the policy that the European Union has put in place when it comes to recycling, we are, I would say, globally still the world leaders, I would say, because we have recycling targets, a waste hierarchy that is there for quite some time. But over all those years, most of the legislation was a type of push, a supply side legislation. So basically, we were putting forward secondary raw materials to the market, but there were not much incentives to stimulate the end markets. And that worked for materials whose intrinsic value is rather high and for which there are not too many market failures, but for the ones, and especially we are discussing, but it's not only the only materials used in packaging, but we're discussing a lot right now, plastics. It didn't work that much because at the end of the day, the economics in many instances was not there. So I think the fact that now the Green Deal, the Circular Economy 2.0, and the revision of the essential requirements and the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive is moving on. And we also are looking at the incentives to stimulate the end market is a huge, actually, step forward. And that really needs to be emphasized. That's really important because that actually connects the dots between us at the end of the point, so the recycling industry, and the packaging industry that is placing products on the market. The second thing on which I think, which is really crucial, is more harmonization across Europe. There are still huge differences within the internal market between countries, and we need a better enforcement of obligations which are there for quite some time, separate collection, for instance, and also investments being made in terms of capacity building, especially in countries which are lagging behind when it comes to the recycling capacity and the waste management capacity. And I think also the last point which didn't work and on which we need to make progress and also here progress together is indeed eco-design. And that requires to be extremely precise in how we assess recyclability, how we measure the amount of recycled materials we incorporate in products. And I think that's the main challenge that we have to go in the coming month with the revision of the instruments that you mentioned before.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And Venetia, Spencer now to conclude on the second round of what worked, what hasn't. So what is your take from your point of view?
Thanks, Frederic. Well, I'm certainly the relative newcomer to this debate. So PCEP has existed for about 18 months at this point. But I think that actually slightly answers Jean's point about commitment from the plastics industry. Across the board, I think you see the plastics industry and all of the users of the material as well making huge voluntary commitments to shift the way we treat this material and we manage it. So PCEP has a very ambitious voluntary commitment in line with the European Commission's Plastic Pledge campaign to significantly increase the amount of recycled, and this is important, post-consumer polyolefin back into product. You can see any day of the week, you can look at brands and retailers and others in the industry and see very sizable voluntary commitments in very short timeframes. And I think it is absolutely right that perhaps as a packaging material, we're a bit late to the game, but I'd like to say we're definitely bringing the A game in terms of ambition. And I certainly see, even this year, with all the challenges of the pandemic, what I see in my membership is an absolute commitment to circular economy as the strategic long-term route for the plastics industry. And I don't think that will change. Maybe to then answer your actual question, things that have worked and haven't worked, I would certainly agree with everyone that EPR has been a really effective tool for changing and for creating these collection sorting systems. One thing I've certainly begun to realize, and I think Citeo is a kind of best-in-class EPR, but when you look at EPR across Europe, it is just astonishing the differences we actually have in how it works and functions, country to country, within country, sometimes regionally. And I suspect when you stand outside the packaging industry, you go, oh, it's fine, we have EPR. But when you then look at them all, part of that challenge of how we create the scale and the economics that make all this work is because it's actually really quite different. And if we could really improve, in a way, the harmonization of EPR schemes, I think we could start to see real shifts. So if I can give you an example, I have a member that has what's called in the industry an advanced recycling technology for flexible films. Great proven commercial recycling technology, but there isn't enough feedstock. There isn't enough collection of flexibles, polyolefin flexibles in a pure polyolefin flexible bale for them to invest in, scaling up the capacity of that recycling technology. And we can't do this country by country from my perspective, right? We've got to treat Europe as a single market in the same way we do for products. We need to do that for our waste, and we need to do that for our packaging recycling. Emmanuel talked about investment in capacity. PCEP called really strongly for the recovery fund to invest back in circular economy infrastructure, and it's absolutely true. I mean, if I look at how much polyolefin, post-consumer polyolefin we collected last year in Europe and how much we sent to recyclers, the numbers, they're not what they should be. But we sent as much material to recyclers as capacity exists. So to shift the remaining about 1/5 of what we collect and send it to recyclers, we need a lot more recycling capacity on the ground. And for them to invest in that, we need a lot more certainty about supply of feedstock. And like I said, the whole thing's a system. But I see huge opportunity here for us to take tools we know work well, implement them better, generate more of a European approach, a single market approach to the system, And then I think, you'll start to see really quite quickly very large strides in improving the circularity of the material flow.
Thank you, Venetia. And I think this is a very good introduction to my next question, which was actually about EPR schemes. I think all of you mentioned to different degrees the need for greater harmonization in those schemes. Countries do it differently, sometimes regions do it differently. Mattia, Pellegrini, the European Commission typically loves to harmonize. So do you guys have plans in the pipeline to harmonize those EPR schemes further? It seems there's appetite, at least coming from industry. Please unmute yourself.
Sorry. Indeed, we are aware that there is a strong request coming from industry, both in terms of separate collection systems and EPR schemes. And in both cases, I think the Green Deal is quite ambitious, because if you look back, it seems now ages ago, but the Green Deal was December of last year. Of course, with COVID in the middle, things have changed enormously. But in the Green Deal, it is clearly indicated that the Commission will move towards a more harmonized system for waste collection, as well as to a more harmonized system for modulation of fees in the EPR systems. So that will be clearly the direction. I have colleagues working on that. So, and the idea is to come up with this new sort of guidelines by 2022. So indeed, the Commission is going the direction of, because we see the same problem that essentially there are two things with EPR. One is towards a more harmonized system, which better reflect the cost of treating waste and managing waste. So a more harmonized system. And two, also the scope. Because EPR system, they exist for a number of products, notably packaging is one of the directives, but also batteries, electronic equipments, single-use plastic directive more recently. But there are important waste streams, like, for example, clothing or clothes, or construction and demolition, where at the moment there is no legislation at EU level which foreseen an EPR scheme. So the idea is twofold. One, towards more harmonization. Two, also enlarging the scope of the coverage of these schemes. And the final point, I'm very happy that it was made by the last speaker. Indeed, I think there is a huge opportunity now with the Recovery Fund to invest on circular economy infrastructure. We are working even during these days with the Recovery Task Force in terms of circular economy, to have even a module on circular economy. But as you know, each of the member states will have to present now by basically in almost 1 month, by mid of October, a recovery and resilient plan where he will explain how he's going to spend all this amount of money. And I'm thinking about countries, including my own country, which actually is the main beneficiary of the Recovery Fund, that this will be clearly an area where investment should go. So that's I think is very good. But of course, this will be a decision of member states, but indeed the one way is legislation, but the other way is also to boost the infrastructure for circular economy. And that's now there is a unique opportunity which will only come, in my view, once in terms of this magnitude of money that will be made available.
Mattia, you mentioned a move towards more harmonized system for the collection of waste. Can you explain what you mean by this? Does it mean that from one country to the other, we will start using the same color bags or things like that? Is this what the Commission has in mind?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And indeed, this is at political level. The mandate we have received from our politician, from this College of Commission, is to look also into that issue. It may be seen as an excessive intervention from Brussels, but at the moment, indeed, as you said, there are different bags for collecting the different streams and different rules. I mean, for example, in some countries, metal is put together with glass, in others with plastics. And this does not allow, for example, because, I mean, there is an important element of consumer education. So that's in consumer behavior, because all start with the right separation or the right sorting, to use technical words, of by the household, so at the home or the house. And this is we know that there are often wrong sorting, and one way would be that by having this harmonized color coding, and that could facilitate also pan-European campaign. By the way, it could even be linked to the revision of the packaging directive, because then you could have a color coding in the packaging, which will tell the consumer, okay, this color means that it goes on that bag. So there is simply no mistake that can be made by the consumer, which often, unfortunately, and we have plenty of evidence of that, many things which are recyclable, they go on the residual bin, and this is really a waste in the real terms, both from an economic and environmental point of view. So that's indeed that we're also exploring that option.
Thank you, Mattia, for those explanations. Hornain, I saw you were nodding while Mattia was explaining this. What are your thoughts about this? You know, harmonizing the color bags. I mean, I'm French. Indeed, whenever I go to France, the color bags are completely different. The yellow may mean something different, or the blue. It's a real mess. So, Hornain, do you think some harmonization there makes sense?
Oh, yes, Frederic, it would really make sense. And I think we should start by our own country. That's, I'm the advocate of that harmonization in France and in each country, because here, if you go to Vendée, it's different from the Paris area, which is different from the Savoie. And it's, as you said, it's a complex issue. And here in France, the municipalities have the freedom to decide the color of the bin and the streams they do. So, it's a real issue here. Now, talking about harmonization in Europe, I think there is a very good thing which is coming up, which is we are going to calculate the recycling rates the same way, which is a great news, because at the moment also this is a mess. We don't know exactly what the real figures are, and that's very important. And as far as harmonization is concerned, maybe we have here a little contradiction between France and Europe, because Europe said we should create circular economy of especially on plastics. So you guys, you have to go get go collect, recycle, and and go for it with a very high ambition. The French regulation says that yes, you have to invest in recycling, but at the same time, into 2040, all single-use plastic packaging will have disappeared, which is a kind of a problem as far as harmonization is concerned, because if we want people to invest in recycling, in new technology, in eco-design, in the facilities that we need, it's rather difficult to have these two messages. And sometimes people ask us, what should I do? Should I go for recycling, or should I try to, eliminate all plastic recycling from the market? So we still have issues from that, but harmonization is great. And to the question you ask is, do you think EPR schemes are efficient? Is this a question you ask, or I'm not sure, you just asked about harmonization?
I did share those questions in advance, but you're absolutely welcome to answer them.
No, I answered that at the right time. No, I thought I missed something. Later. Thank you.
Let me ask other people on the panel to react to what Mattia Pellegrini said about greater harmonization in the way waste is collected and the color of the bags, etc. Archana, what are your views from where you stand, the point of view of PepsiCo? I mean, is that something you would support. Obviously, that would tend to make the market bigger, and therefore is something I imagine you would support, right?
Absolutely. I think I'm in violent agreement with what Mattia as well as Jean has said regarding sort of harmonization of the waste stream so that it's ultimately easier for consumers to know where to dispose, how to dispose, and if they're moving from one area to another in France or from one country to another in Europe, there isn't the level of confusion that there is today to drive some of these waste streams. Equally, I agree with the point that Venetia was making earlier on a pan-European market, because ultimately that is what will drive recyclers to make investments. So, thinking about movement of waste from one country to another in Europe, provided it's meant for recycling, helps to make the ultimate market bigger. Restricting it to mini markets and saying, recycle content only from a particular member state will be accepted, constrains the development of a market that is already faced with so many challenges.
Thank you, Archana. Maybe thoughts from you, Emmanuel, Katrakis?
Yes.
Maybe you could even, because I sense that you probably will all be in agreement with this idea of greater harmonization, but what do you think then would stand in the way of that to happen? Why haven't we done it already, in a way, Emmanuel?
That's a €1 million question. I think maybe we should be asking the European Commission. But having said that, I think also it's now we have a much deeper understanding right now than even 3 years ago about how waste management and recycling markets do work or can be improved, and also how we work as a value chain, as a supply chain that really starts with the design up to the very end of the use phase of a product. And when it comes to, because we discussed actually the question that about harmonizing the bags, the color of the bags for having more harmonized collection systems across Europe, it also has a lot to do with basically how we advertise and communicate to the consumers the progress we need to do when it comes to the circular economy. So basically from better collection systems in member states, and here I would say that it's always better to have more harmonized system, but there will be differences also depending on the countries and also depending at a local level between highly dense, with a highly dense population in cities or in rural areas, whereby actually the systems will have to be adapted. But that obviously won't change anything to the fact that the signal to the consumer in terms of colors or proper sorting needs to be as harmonized as possible. And here, also French, but I travel over in Europe, and it's always very difficult to keep track with what are the rules in terms of proper sorting for materials. And as we know, and especially for organic materials, which are extremely sensitive to cross-contamination, it's extremely important to have proper separate collections. So that's point number one. Point number two, and that was about the efficiency of the PR schemes. Obviously for streams such as packaging, where we need, and there are market failures, they are efficient, and where I think we need a greater organization is what is going to come next, is how we basically modulate the fees to make them efficient, to drive recyclability, to drive recycled content targets. So we are already moving into the details, and here we see some front runners in certain countries which are going a step forward, and we need to make those front runners the new norm to make sure that basically when we have clear criteria, clear model to assess what is recyclable, what is not, how we can incorporate more recycled content at the end of the day. That's done not only in one country, but across Europe. And also, and I know now I'm moving away from the EPR question in terms of having market-based instruments which are going to stimulate the demand, be them recycled content targets, which are absolutely crucial for our industry, or basically VAT rebate, for instance, tax-based incentives, where I think to have an internal market, we need a minimum harmonization, though I know we are already impinging into what is the member state's usual competence. But I think really to have, and just to conclude on that, the other elements are also extremely important to have a well-functioning secondary raw materials market, to have easier shipment procedures across Europe for materials which are destined for recycling. That's really absolutely crucial, because to scale up capacities, we need to have a market, and the market needs to be big.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And let me turn to Venetia, Spencer, maybe to conclude on that discussion about harmonization. Is there anything more that you can say that hasn't been said already?
You've obviously not met me recently, Frederic. I can say a lot. No, I think maybe to try and conclude a little bit on harmonization, three things really stand out at me. One is, I think, Jean's example about in France, where it's up to the municipality to decide what streams are being collected. I mean, before we talk about what color bag we're collecting it in, if we could at least harmonize what we're collecting, I think that's really critical to scale. And certainly if I think about polyolefins, a rigid bale and a flexible bale is great, but a flexible polypropylene and a flexible polyethylene and a flexible, and a mixed bale would be even better. So between, not just plastic, but the actual individual polymer streams, the polymers that are compatible together to make a higher quality recyclate is, I think, vital. When it comes to the color of the bags, I mean, for me, this is all about consumer communications, and communications is all about simplicity. And actually, I'd love to highlight what I kind of mentioned in our opening comments, the evolution of digital watermarking, which I think could completely change the way that we communicate with people about which bag they put it in, and kind of future-proofs us. So we don't necessarily have to think about the color of the packet, but this is a clever technology that allows a citizen to use their phone to tell them which bin to put it in. And for me, that's game-changing. Rather than trying to unite all the municipalities across Europe, maybe there are technological solutions to consumer education. And I think my third point was, we've talked a lot also about different tools to drive this change, and I think there are lots of levers. We've talked about EPR, we've talked about mandatory recycled content. Emmanuel just started to talk about financial incentives. I think all of these are good levers, but what we really need to do is quickly pause and make sure they're all working together towards circularity, because one of the things I've observed with the pace of policy and commitment is we've got a lot of different activities happening across the packaging and waste management system, and we probably should just make sure that none of them are actually counteracting each other. That all of the incentives and all of that we put in place are all driving us towards the ultimate game, which is keep material in the economy and don't let it leak into the environment, get turned into energy. We want to, I think we need to really keep our eye on the ball there and make sure that everything we're doing is working together.
Venetia, let me keep with you so you can speak first for a change. Mattia Pellegrini mentioned the possibility or the idea that is being considered at the European Commission that EPR schemes would cover not just the waste collection and treatment, which is what is happening now, but also the waste prevention side of things. What are your views on that?
That's a great question to go first on. Thanks, Frederic. So I should probably put a disclaimer here. This is not a topic that we've reached a value chain position on yet. So this is, I suppose, in a sense, a very much personal perspective. But I actually think the waste hierarchy does an enormous amount for waste prevention, right? And the principles in the circular economy about shifting to a reuse model and to new business models also will do an enormous amount for waste prevention. So I fully agree with Mattia that over packaging just shouldn't happen. But packaging is there for a purpose, and we have to remember also that we have a climate neutrality goal for Europe, and there are lots of areas of packaging where it's really fundamental and it's really contributing to that climate neutrality aspect in terms of transport, food waste avoidance. I mean, you will be super familiar with the benefits, right? So I think what I fully endorse in the shift of thinking is to move away from thinking of the circular economy as how do we manage waste, to thinking of it as this kind of product material policy that's really central to our economy. So suddenly waste isn't waste, it's something with value, and everything with value we treat well, right? So yeah, so it's a slightly waffly answer, but to be clear, I mean, clearly no one wants to create waste, right? That's just not good business for anybody. But I think you know, and I think the waste hierarchy we have in Europe to reduce, then reuse, then recycle is the right order, and we have to just keep bearing that in mind as we shift the system.
Archana, Jagannathan, I see you nodding on this. Your views very briefly about the possibility that EPR schemes might also cover the prevention side of things. Is that an idea that you would support?
Yes, absolutely. We would support that. I think businesses do have a role to play. Producers have a role to play in driving waste prevention as well. A couple of people, Venetia and Mattia earlier mentioned overpackaging. We're actively on a journey to reduce and lightweight as much packaging as we can. We've reduced the size of our snack bags in the UK by 30%, for instance. So there's a lot of work on reducing overpackaging, but equally, when it comes to waste prevention, I think brands can play a more active role in educating consumers and telling consumers how to actively dispose waste. And it could be something simple, like, you know, the right messaging on the top of beverage caps that we've done, which just nudges consumers to recycle and dispose it in the right way. But equally, we've run sort of recycling drives at sponsored events like UEFA Champions League. But, you know, whatever we can do to ingrain that habit of correct disposal with consumers that eventually helps to prevent waste, I think is going to be critical, and we're committed to doing that.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Jean Hornain, a few words about the idea of financing waste prevention through EPR. What are your views on this? I mean, if there's less to be recycled, you're out of a job, aren't you?
Yes, but as you might know, we're a non-profit. We don't, you know, I don't have goals as far as revenues, as far as profit is concerned. And my goal is to help the companies to reduce the environmental impact of their packaging and their paper. That's it, you know, and the less there is waste, the happier I am. And yes, I think that prevention is part of our job on several topics. The first one is reduction and reuse models that we promote, and we're trying to help companies to reduce the amount of waste and packaging. And as you might know, we created, you know, I think it's 10 or 12 years ago, I wasn't here, the eco-modulation fees, which means that if you reduce, if you're going to more recycle, if you are going to substitute packaging for better material, you get bonuses. We have bonus and malus system, you know, eco-modulation, which the more your packaging is recycled, the less you pay. The less your packaging is recycled, the more you pay. So that's what we try to create to stimulate eco-design within the companies. And third, we are also involved in consumer campaigns and education, as was said before. And of course, if the brands themselves, and they are starting to do it on their packaging, on their advertising, saying, hey guys, this is not a waste, this should be recycled, this is resource, you should go for it. So yes, prevention is part of our job. It's key to our job. Reduction is key to our job, and we have no business issue about that. The only question that remains is should the companies be responsible for the cost of cleaning? And which the European answer is rather yes, but you know, as you see, you are making the responsibility of the producers higher, saying, you know, if I throw away my bottle, well, Pepsi might have to pay for the cleaning of the bottle. And this is a debate between the responsibility borne by the companies, you know, which is basically eco-design, 100% recyclable or reusable, and the responsibility of the consumer and of the citizen, which cannot be. You know, this system works because there is a share of responsibility. Companies have a responsibility, municipalities have responsibility to set up good collection systems, and then the citizens have their own responsibility. So and it works if everyone is free and responsible.
Yeah, thank you, Jean, for mentioning that. I kind of have to turn back to you now, Archana, about this issue that Jean raised about covering the cost of cleaning up. I mean, that I suppose wouldn't please you much, I guess.
I think, it's clearly been laid out in the European guidance that the EPR schemes cover the cost of litter cleanup as well, which ultimately us as producers pay into. Having said that, wouldn't it be better for the entire system, again, if we go with the idea of prevention and not have that litter to begin with in the first place by encouraging consumers to recycle and dispose of the waste in the right way? So yes, of course, litter cleanup can be done, but it's not achieving the long-term goal for the circular economy, and that can only be driven through behavior change and encouraging consumers to do the right thing.
Emmanuel Katrakis, let me turn to you now with a question that Hornain raised as well, and that you raised too before, which is the eco-modulation of fees. You probably have a good overview of how this is done across different countries because you're heading this trade association. Are you happy with the way this is done currently in the different countries, or do you see this as another area where we could benefit from further harmonization?
I think here we clearly need to go for further harmonization, also because the modulation of fees within the waste legislation is something that is rather recent. It came first, at least in law, with much more precise criteria, which have to do indeed with waste prevention, with the recyclability, with avoiding the use of harmful substances, with the revision of the Waste Framework Directive. And just now, I think the Commission published a study on what could be principles for eco-modulation of fees. And what we are seeing so far is that some EPR schemes in countries are making great progress. And it's not others are in a wait-and-see mode, but basically, for the time being, there are not extremely good harmonization in that trend. And I think that's really absolutely essential, because now we have a far clearer understanding on what are the obstacles, technical obstacles, which do handle recycling under today's economically, technically viable conditions, and for which more harmonization at European level, very clear, especially when it comes to plastics, trying to avoid using too many additives or pacifiers or too many different colors or too many different materials, whenever that is feasible, is absolutely crucial. And here, having a more harmonized approach to which are those criteria and how they are being measured in practice is absolutely essential. And I guess that Citeo would agree with that as well. The other thing that I think is really important is how we communicate that to the consumers. Because if I go today in a supermarket, I can see, because with a certain amount of knowledge, a number of packaging products which today is still fully recyclable, yet any consumer who has no knowledge about recycling and the end of life stage of products would just make and buy that based on basically how attractive is the packaging product and the content, obviously. And I think, as just making always that example, when I go and buy a washing machine, I know based on a very clear labeling how energy efficient is the washing machine or the oven or whatever energy related efficient product is. And I think we need in the future, in the second step, or at the same time even better, to have harmonized criteria to define what is recyclability, how we measure recycled content, and obviously how we foster waste prevention, especially for overpackaging issues, and proper information to the consumers so that consumer can make a well-informed decision. And that can also then be linked to further incentives, for instance, and that would drive the entire market towards the right direction.
Thanks, Emmanuel. I will give the floor to Mattia Pellegrini, maybe for some final comments, because we're reaching the end of the hour that we had ahead of us. Mattia, we heard from all the panelists almost a resounding call for more harmonization in many different areas, in the way waste is collected, in the way the EPR fees are being implemented. And you must find that pretty encouraging, I guess, but do you believe there will be resistance from the national level? What do you see, potentially as the obstacles lying ahead? Is there not a risk that the Commission, if it comes out with these proposals to harmonize all these different things, that that you'll have a backlash at the national level, that, oh, Brussels is again trying to dictate what we do with our waste bags. Is that something you're kind of fearful about?
Indeed, I will not shy away. And what do you have today in this panel is very interesting, because you have the producer like PepsiCo, you have the recyclers, so the recycling company like EuRIC, the Federation, you have the EPR schemes like Citeo from France, you have the platform association in charge of circular economy for a given type of plastics, like Venetia is representing. So you actually have, from all different angles, these actors. We are aware they are all in favor of what we would like to do, but there is a sort of giant which is missing the room, which is exactly what you said, Frederic, which is the member states. I remember another debate a few months ago. I mean, I joined the unit in December of last year, and I remember a debate also on packaging, where there were all the big ones, Procter & Gamble and others, and all asking even more, let's say, even a more clear way for more harmonization, for tackling the issue of separate collection, the issue of EPR modulation of fees that Emmanuel was referring to. Then I came back to the unit. At that time it was pre-COVID, and I said to some of my colleagues, I said, I mean, here we have a motorway ahead of us. And then they said, yes, but you didn't, you have to still count the member states, because whatever we are going to propose, we will have to negotiate with member states. And as also Jean was saying, on some of these issues, actually even it goes down all the way to the local level, which creates this additional burden. So we will do it, and then I think we will have to be very ambitious and try to find at the end a compromise proposal with the 27 member states. That's but that will be the main. We are also aware that the Parliament fully supports this move towards more harmonization. So the real challenge will be the member states and the Council.
Indeed, as is often the case, actually, when it comes to European matters. Thank you very much, Mattia. Those will be the concluding words. I'm hearing some kind of bell ringing to alert us that we should be wrapping up. I'd like to thank you, the speakers, the panelists, for attending this session and participating in this lively debate. I hope everybody also, as part of the online audience, appreciated this very interesting conversation we had. And I will wrap it up here. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good day.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.